So we have a special edition of the GW Basketball Insiders here. Liam unfortunately can't make it. He has some tech issues, but I am joined right now by my good friend Tyler Cronin from the 3-Bid League Pod to help us preview the A-10 tournament and sort of A-10 tournament as a whole and GW's path through it. Tyler, I know this is a busy time for you. It's a busy time for us all. Thank you so much for giving us a few moments here today.
Yeah, of course, David, man. I'm always happy to talk A-10 basketball. I would come on these shows anytime, and everyone just wants to invite me and my co-host Matt on right before the A-10 tournament so we get kind of stacked up.
Of course, I get it. Well, that's because no one knows the whole conference better than you do. And so you are the perfect person, especially at the situation like GW, where we don't necessarily know their next opponent yet. And they're sort of, we need to wait on the Fordham, Rhode Island game, look ahead to maybe George Mason, not look too far ahead, but consider that going forward. So you are a great person to give us sort of a whole perspective on this league and this tournament. So I'm just going to start out with sort of a quick question to sort of set this up. Me and Liam, of course, talked a lot about GW this year, and we sort of have been, following this team very closely, really zeroing in on it as sort of maybe not necessarily an outsider, but maybe someone who is maybe a bit of a different perspective than us. What have been some of your biggest takeaways from the Revolutionaries this season?
I think the biggest one, and this is something that I saw the Twitter questions that came in.
Mhm.
I'd kind of prepared this as one of my answers, but I guess I'll just tell it now. I am incredibly impressed by the fact that Chris Caputo found a way to turn this team into a quality defense first squad. Because you look at what he did the first 2 years, and then you look at that transfer portal class where let's take Rafael Castro out of it. You see Trey Moss, you see Gerald Drumgoole, you see Sean Hansen. And my immediate thought was, oh no, is this guy really just kind of hell bent on just winning shootouts for his entire career? Because this team just doesn't quite have the offensive punch to do that night in and night out. And what we learned this season is that he and this staff can actually develop these players defensively. And bringing in a Castro, really kind of finding a Christian Jones out of nowhere after a year and a half of being with the program and not contributing much at all. It really blew me away this season.
Yeah, and people sort of forget with Miami, he was their defensive coordinator, and that was like his big role there. And so, I think a big thing is then not to like crap on James Bishop, but that wasn't one of Caputo's guys coming in, and Bishop was a holdover from the Jamie and Christian era. So this was really Caputo's first season with all of his guys. So I think this was a great opportunity to see him sort of play a style of basketball that he was maybe more comfortable with and really get like his system in place. So I think it's a great sign. I think you made a great point. I think it's a great sign for the future of the program as well that we really did sort of get this elite defense going. So my next question sort of is going to be about or not maybe a question, but just sort of jumping off point is this Rhodey Fordham game because I know that's where all GW's fans' eyes are going to be. Again, kind of not the most fun game for maybe a neutral fan, but what are you going to look for in that matchup?
It's a disgusting game, David. Like I
Yeah,
can't I can't believe I'm actually going to fly in and watch this in person.
I
I'm
do. Wait, do you think we will be the only media members there for that game?
No, because I actually have it on confirmation of at least two others coming to that
Well,
game.
Michael
So
Bergman is staying at my apartment the night before, so he
yeah,
better
and I
be there.
fully believe
Yes.
Bergman would be there. So I say uh 12 max. We'll get like one like DMV staple, like maybe like Patrick Stevens will be there.
Oh, yeah. Great call.
But yeah, for this game specifically, I mean, I think with all of these first round A-10 tournament games, you're kind of watching in the first 15 to 20 minutes of real time to just see who bothered to show up. Because you get it every year. One of these six teams, just they already do not care. And if they fall down by 10, they're going to lose the game by 25. It happens to one team every year. I think either of these teams are potential candidates for it. I think in terms of real on the court basketball, let's see if Fordham's small backcourt is able to corral Sebastian Thomas at all. I think for Fordham to win this game, they're going to have to keep it low scoring. But if Rhode Island can really just kind of get the pace jacked up and let Thomas run free, there's just nothing Fordham can do to match them.
Yeah, that's kind of my take on this too, where it's like it's Sebastian Thomas's to lose, basically. Like I think is a better way to put it because I think he just needs to play like just the way he's been playing all year, and I think Rhodey easily wins this. So I want to touch on something you said though, because I think the thing about a team not showing up is a really interesting sort of take, and it's something obviously we've seen. Because I think I know who that team is going to be this pillow fight. Who do you think it might be?
I think everyone has the same kind of idea, and
Yeah.
everyone's kind of just leaning towards UMass, which is always a safe bet because Frank Martin blew up again the other day. They 2 years ago they had the worst quit I've ever seen
Oh yeah.
in a pillow fight, where I think Richmond, a really bad Richmond team, was up like 22-4 against them at one point. I think it's either UMass or it's one of these two teams.
I feel like Rhodey shows up though, because I
Yeah,
think they have like enough talent where they like still have that belief that they could do something. Because it's like I know there have been issues. I know there have been some like truly disastrous losses, but I still feel like when you have a guy like Sebastian Thomas, that you go into any game thinking you can win, and that's something pretty important in a tournament setting.
the reason that they're a candidate is because they unintentionally did it like 4 times this year.
This is
Where
true.
if they come out and all of a sudden Thomas starts the game 2 for 9 and none of their key role players are hitting threes, it really doesn't even matter what their effort level is. They can just get rolled over by anybody.
Yeah. So I have a theory again for a team like GW in this case, but really any team that's playing one of the teams in the first round that has a game on Wednesday. I think that the only rooting interest a team like that should have is that they want the game to go to overtime. You want them to be as tired as possible because I don't like rooting for specific matchups because I think you should just be ready for whoever you go. But just like looking at it from a neutral perspective, what do you think is a better matchup for GW in that game?
You
From
want to play Fordham just because they're not good.
Yeah, but my thinking on this is again, GW played Fordham very recently, and that always worries me. Like they played them last week.
I mean, I have struggled to find any reason to believe that Fordham is anything better than just an abjectly terrible team. They've lost 8 straight now after a little blip where they actually won all 3 of their games in a 2 week span. Rhode Island is a not good team that is incredibly dangerous in certain moments because of Thomas, because of David Green, who
Mm-hmm.
ended up actually coming in second in the league in 3-point shooting in A-10 play this year, because of Jaden House, who is one of the great microwave scorers in this conference. If you're GW, if you can just corral those two little guards, Medor and Jackie Johnson, which what GW has done all season gives you hope that that actually should be quite easy for them, then the Rams are not threatening. Well, the Bronx Rams, at least.
Good clarification. Yeah. So no, but something again. So you mentioned yes with Rhode Island, something that is I think something that's a little worrisome for GW. That's the likely matchup they'll get. Just stating facts. They're the 10-15 Fordham again. It's been a disaster. They were without Fuchs and Green when GW played them earlier in the year. GW was also shorthanded. They didn't have Buchanan, and Trey Moss has pretty much been a non-factor throughout most of the season, like their ninth, 10th man most games. But I think this game will look a lot different than the one they played in January that GW won, and so I think that's a little bit of a cause for concern. But Tyler, let's sort of dive into some of these other mailbag questions that you saw. You touched on it a bit. I think you were referencing the question from Brendan Fusco. Um, so he asked, how deep in the tournament does GW need to go for this to be a successful season for them? And you've sort of touched on this already that you think it is a successful season. But sort of what do you think would be a good tournament run for this team?
A successful season, just don't bomb out against one of these two.
Mm-hmm.
I now on the flip side, just because of the way the matchups fell. If GW had dropped into the 8-9 game and they beat Bonaventure and then lost to VCU, I think everyone just kind of walks away content. But if
Mm-hmm.
they lose to Mason a third time, and just how bitter really both of those losses felt, I Chris Caputo blew up in both of those games, right? At the end.
Uh, yes. So in the first game, that is the one where Castro missed those free throws, and then there were some very questionable calls during the overtime periods. And Caputo had some of the most pointed remarks I'd ever heard from any college basketball head coach in a press conference. And my favorite part about that was uh, Associate Commissioner of the Atlantic 10, Drew Dickerson, was right there in the press conference. Because again, with the A-10 headquartered in DC, you see a lot of these A-10 officials at these games, and he was right there, staring right at him. And I actually heard he didn't get fined for his comments, but I know me and a few other people were expecting that fine to come very quickly. And then he wasn't happy after the second game result, but he was definitely more upset. At least in the press conference of the first game, I think on the court he was a little more upset in the second game. But yeah, both of those are brutal losses.
The second one was a little shakier. That was probably the right call, but it was close. And I I just think
Yes.
that GW fans are going to end the year with a really bitter taste if they lose close to George Mason again,
Yeah,
because
and
they're
there's
going to walk into that game feeling like the luck needs to be on their side this time.
yeah, and I mean, I think that's kind of a this is kind of a if GW does get past Rhode Island or Fordham and to face Georgia, I feel like that's kind of a nightmare matchup for the Patriots, right? They're sort of limping into this two seed, limping into the share of the conference title. And again, this is a team that has sort of a chip on their shoulder against you, beating a team three times in one year. We saw this happen with Joes and LaSalle, who played three times in the regular season, which is hilarious. But beating a team three times in one year is one of the hardest things you can do in college, have to do in college basketball. Like I think this is a if I were George Mason like that, I feel like that's like the last team you want to face, right?
I mean, just look at George Mason's A-10 season and look at the games that they lost, with
Mm-hmm.
the exception of that Rhode Island one, which was kind of weird. But their losses to VCU and Duquesne, their closest games, those two against GW specifically, those are three teams that are very willing to punch you in the mouth three times and then stand right back up straight. And that's
Yeah,
George Mason wins games by imposing their will and bullying people on the defensive end. They're not a good offense. They rely so much on Haynes's physicality and just hopefully getting a hot shooting game from one of their guards. But if you can bring the fight to George Mason, if you can put them on their toes, then they all of a sudden become very vulnerable. And
I
there's really
agree.
there's really
Yeah.
only four teams in this league that can do it. It's Duquesne, VCU, GW, and Loyola.
Yeah, and like I know both of us were at that VCU game for George Mason. We both made the trip down to Richmond, and I think the biggest thing you saw was that Richmond was able to like force turnovers and get transition opportunities and get that kill shot in the second half that really sort of ruined things for George Mason and really got them on track. Because again, that first half, disgusting rock fight, just the kind of game George Mason wanted to play against sort of a superior opponent. So I think what you said is exactly right, and I think you pointed out another great thing that I've sort of noticed is that if GW like George Mason, I feel like to win a game in which the other team is also playing well, they sort of need a role player to have an exceptional game. You know what I mean? Like I think about that Woody Newton explosion against SLU, or um, like Maddox lighting it up from three. I don't consider Maddox a role player, but like someone playing above themselves usually. And so I think if they don't have that as well, again, it's going to be tough for them to win in a tournament setting.
Basically, any time that Katie Johnson is
Yeah.
a
Did you
positive
see
is the big
Bruce
one.
Pearl's press conference
Yes.
shouting out Katie Johnson? I love that. That cracked me up when he was like so proud of Katie for like leading the country in tax.
Yeah, him and Philip Russell really helped him to try to get to that spot.
Yeah. Okay, so Philip Russell, this is a little aside, but I we can do a little preview. Is this okay if I do a sneak preview of my media poll here?
Yeah, let's do it.
So one thing that I had, and I this is always one of my most difficult sort of spots to fill is the glue guy. And I'm sure you agree on this because that it can be so vague. So the way I sort of think about it is a guy who's outside his team's like top three players, who I think like does the little things. And the guy who stuck out to me the most for that is Philip Russell. So I think you saw it as well when VCU lost without him to Dayton, just how important he was. What do you think a guy like that means to a team like VCU, and how important is he, and how important is it that he like sort of gets back healthy?
He is the high end swing piece for VCU. Now,
Mm-hmm.
if VCU plays an A level game, no one in this league is beating them on that given night unless Dayton or maybe St. Joe's also plays an A to A plus level game, because the Rams are just that talented. But I think when you start to look at a night where maybe Max Shulga is not as impactful as normal, especially a night where Joe Bamisile just doesn't have it. And then when we start to look at a potential maybe NCAA tournament spot for the Rams, Philip Russell is the guy who brings the juice for them. He's
Yeah.
their best perimeter defender on a team that really runs five quality defenders out at all times. But the more you
I'd
talk to
I'd argue
people,
Bamsel. I'd argue Bamsel.
well, so for me, it's really just the fact that the more I've talked to people who really watch every single game, whether they're around the program or just following the program, Philip Russell's name comes up far more often than anyone else's when you start to have that conversation. And then he's the energy guy. I think we both saw it in the George Mason game. One of their catalysts was the fact that him and Katie Johnson were just trying to pick petty little scraps with each other the whole time. And I think that in certain positions that helps to galvanize VCU, and especially like a quarterfinal game, playing at 11:30 on a Friday, it's a little sleepy in there. The VCU fans will bring some energy, but especially if they end up with Duquesne specifically, you could see a universe where they're down 12-8 at the under 8 timeout and they kind of need somebody to just shove a guy or maybe try to flop his way into a flagrant. That's what
Yeah.
Philip Russell brings.
Yeah. So again, I think you put it perfectly. I think a guy like that raises a team is like gives you so much. And I think it's really so important, maybe when you're on that third game in a row, second game in a row after a tough one, you know, you're exhausted, the rotation's tightened up, a guy like that to get your team energy, I think is crucial, so crucial. So let's keep making our way through this mailbag. My pal Matt Brooks, shout out to Foghorns. He asked, with so much parity between the teams and the general chaotic energy of the A-10, I like the way he phrased that. I'd be curious to hear your most confident, if not tame, predictions about this tournament. So you go first, and then I'll hit you with one because I have a good one.
So, contrary to the idea that we've had all season long of this mushy middle, I
Mhm.
think by the end of the season, we really ended up with a thick line of demarcation between the middle and the bad. And ironically, it ended up right on that line of who got a bye and who didn't. And these bottom six have all just, with the slight exception of Rhode Island, who sometimes can still throw out a great game, but they've all more or less just kind of played poorly the last 3 weeks plus. And when you start to look at the specific matchups of day two, I think we're going to see at least two, if not all three of those winners dispatched very easily in their second games. Like St. Louis is going to get really lucky where Richmond and Davidson are both good teams who match up horribly with the Billikens. St. Louis is just a better version of what those two teams do. I think GW is just flat out better and more disciplined than both Rhode Island and Fordham. And as weird and streaky as St. Joe's is, they're going to have a significant talent advantage against whoever they play. And they're not losing to LaSalle twice in 5 days.
No, that's yeah. The St. Joe's LaSalle thing. So Liam, who just hopped in, Liam is in Philly right now. Is in this. I'm gonna hit you with this question, Liam. We were just working our way through the mailbag, and
Okay.
we were hitting Matt's question. So A-10 tournament prediction.
Predict his prediction was the or his question was the prediction I was most certain of, right?
Yeah,
That George Mason will not win the tournament. That is the one I'm most certain of.
yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
I just
Do you want
don't
to
I
do you
don't
want to
I think they
expound?
yeah, I think they've been trending the wrong way. I feel like earlier in conference play I saw them um I saw them like maybe winning some of these close games, which is obviously a good thing if you can win all these close games. And I kind of feel like there was a few games that they maybe squeaked by that they shouldn't have. They're obviously a really good team. And they've now sort of I think there was a world in which they could have been a tournament team, but obviously now they need to win the A-10 tournament to do that. Um, I just don't see it happening. I'm going to look like a big idiot if I'm wrong. And if I'm wrong, I am going to delete this section and we're never going to talk about it again. So there you go.
I tend to agree with you, and I was going to say something along those lines, but I'll go something different. I'll go with an off the court prediction that I think will have another viral moment, like the confetti drop or something like that. It's the A-10. Something crazy is going to happen. I think there'll be another moment that captivates the sports world for for us. So we'll do one more because Tyler, I know you're very busy right now, so you have we only have a few more minutes with you. But this is from another one of our friends and listeners, JJ Gottschalk. He is wondering which teams would be helped or hurt the most if the A-10 tournament had on-campus games on Wednesday and Thursday. So I want to hear your take because me and Liam did some research for this and have an idea, but I want to hear your take first.
So there is one very clear, and I of course thought of this while I was walking around and couldn't pull it up and look at and pick up the actual stat. So I'm going to try to cobble it together while I'm talking, but
we'll see if we can help out. Yeah.
So St. Bonaventure, if they could have gotten that 8-9 game at home, because in 8-9 means absolutely nothing. There's no difference whatsoever. You're just playing each other anyway, but just specifically to get Duquesne into the Riley Center, because these two have been playing twice a year, every year, basically since I can remember. Duquesne's won up in that building twice since 2010. St. Bonaventure just owns them up there. And to get that Riley Center crowd against a hated rival on a Thursday night would really be a significant shifting force. Now, instead, they're playing against each other in the worst, most neutral environment in college basketball. The 8-9 game at the A-10 tournament where you have 1,100 people in there, it's not even noon yet. And if the game stinks, it is dead. Like 2 years ago, Bonaventure played Davidson in that 8-9 game, and it's the first time in my entire life that I've been at a basketball game legitimately afraid that I might fall asleep in my seat during a media timeout. Like, no one's cheering. It's a bunch of neutral fans who've shown up for later in the day or the next day. And so that is just pure who can play better in an awkward situation.
Yeah, and so this, me and Liam took an angle to this. I think just for time's sake, I agree. St. Bonaventure, I think is the correct answer. And do you know what we think is the biggest reason why, after everything you just said, they are not on spring break. They had an early spring break, so there will be full students there as well, which is a danger for these. So that's something you need to consider. So we actually compiled all the schools other than the top four that are on spring break and aren't. So the teams that would be on spring break this week: Richmond, Davidson, Rhodey, GW, and SLU. Not on spring break: Fordham, LaSalle, UMass, Duquesne, St. Bonaventure, and Joe's. So that's an angle we had on that, because again, I think a big loss for GW, again, not that there are a ton of student fans, but again, they're all away. They're all out of town. So
yeah,
not going to be a huge factor.
So wait, going back to the dead 8-9 games, sometimes they'll do a field trip. Is that do they wait until later? They wait till Friday to do that?
I think that's a Brooklyn thing.
Oh, it's not a DC
I
thing.
don't think
Okay.
they do it in DC. I'm trying to remember back to the Mason Fordham game 3 years ago, but I don't think there were kids in there.
Yeah. No, that would I'm definitely with you. I think the difference between the Riley Center and like a 10th full, probably not a 10th, but a very, very empty Capital One Arena
like 4% full.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Tyler, I have one more question for you and Liam. I'm very glad you could join us this because I want your take on this too. Chris Caputo has not won an A-10 tournament game yet in his time at GW. What do you think is the biggest thing that him and that the GW Revolutionaries need to do to sort of get that monkey off their back and get a win and against what should be a beatable opponent? And what do you think is the biggest thing that needs to go right for them?
By the way, a quick side note, that has plagued a lot of the coaches from his class, because I know off the top of my head, Frank Martin is 0-2. I know absolutely that Drew Valentine is 0-2 because Loyola has never won an A-10 tournament game in school history.
That Loyola game
which
last year
is
was nuts.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun stat to whip out if they lose the 4-5 game again. But yeah, I mean, GW is in a very advantageous spot. And this is a team, I think you think back to Caputo's first team that got to 500 as well. And every piece of analytics said that it was garbage and they were so lucky to be there. This team is actually good. And it really kind of depends on the matchup. I think Fordham, if you can just be disciplined, feed Castro, and stay out of foul trouble, it should be an easy victory. Rhode Island, it's going to come down to really that same stuff, but also can Christian Jones elevate his game again? Because he's been such a spotty player throughout conference play. He seems to have hit the freshman wall over the last few weeks. They're going to need him to play extremely well defensively, and then you're going to need somebody to kick in some threes. Like, this cannot be the bottom 20 in the nation 3-point shooting performance. You need like a 3 for 6 out of drum goal. Nothing too much, but Trey Autry maybe a 3 for 7. Somebody's going to have to make enough shots to make the scoreline respectable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great point. Liam, what do you think Capito needs to do?
I agree with basically everything Tyler just said. The interesting thing, I think if they play Rhode Island, which I seems likely they will, this Fordham team is not very good. Although the last team they beat is actually Rhode Island. So anyway, they obviously need to hit some threes. But the interesting thing about the last game that GW played against Rhode Island is they were 4 for 27 from three, and they allowed 16 offensive rebounds, and then they came out with an 8-point win. So I don't what I'm saying is I don't think they're going to be able to do that again. And I am a little scared because they've been so inconsistent from 3-point range that you just never like. They're just not a good 3-point shooting team in my opinion. But I would kind of expand the Christian Jones needs to play well to some of the other guards too. I think Jacoy Hutchinson and Trey Autry kind of don't show up to play, then GW could be in trouble. And that has, to a certain extent, been kind of what has dictated wins and losses for GW this season is how well the guards have played. And obviously they've got Sebastian Thomas on the other side, potentially playing in his last ever game for Rhode Island. So that is a tough matchup for them.
Yeah, well, Tyler, I appreciate everything you have given us today. We know we will hang out in DC, and we can't wait to listen to everything that you put out when you're down there. Where can everyone find your work?
Yeah, so you can find us on Twitter at the number 3bid league pod, and then 3bid league on wherever you get your podcasts. Just throughout the tournament, we'll be bringing, it really kind of depends on how the day shakes out, either 1 to possibly even 2 episodes on each of the days. We're not doing one after the first round, but other than that, yeah, just go follow the show on there. And then if you're interested in more of our kind of random thoughts, that's where we put all of our A-10 stuff. But you can find the links to myself, my co-host Matt's personal accounts, along with my ACC podcast, Up the Coasts. So
Yeah, that's a great listen to. And you know what? If you're listening to us and watching us and you're not watching and listening to them, I don't really know what you're doing. So, Tyler, we appreciate you coming on. This is going to be a great week of basketball. I know we are both very excited. And yeah, best time of the year.
absolutely.